didn't go to the funeral. The city didn't post a reward for one of the criminals that they couldn't catch. And the number of media inches devoted to this story is 10% for the 2 days after the story as to what was devoted to the Howard Beach murder. And I don't want to compare murders, but I will for that to say, because every person's life is sacred. Okay, I'm paranoid. I don't understand what's going on here. We have a new administration. They really don't know where they're at, and they have got too many chains of command, too many bureaucracies, and blah, blah, blah. 10 days later, an empty apartment was firebombed in Canarsie. I'm sure you read about that. An African-American couple was going to move into a white neighborhood, and someone firebombed that apartment to keep them out. A heinous offense, absolutely, positively. What happened within 24 hours? The mayor, everyone, they fell over themselves to issue statements of condemnation. They fell over themselves trying to see the family. Then within 24 hours, the mayor had the borough president, every assembly person, every state senator in his office and said, we condemn this violence. We hate it. Here, victim, is $5,000 in emergency assistance, and we will give you more to repair your apartment. What's that? The perfect response to a bias crime. Jimmy Zappalorti, who was the victim, Staten Island, very imperfect response. I suppose the things did change after we screamed and yelled, and there was a few nasty things going on in the Village Voice and the gay press. We finally arranged for the mayor to go and see the family, 13 days after the murder. And after we, the 5 people and 5 people in AVP and 4 other people in the community scraped together $5,000 of our own money for a reward, the mayor finally did when he finally came to our community center as like, here's your fucking bones, excuse my language. So what I'm saying is it's not only different for the victim, it's different in the way in which the city responds and the community responds. What to do about it? I'm not sure. What we're in the posture of doing is educating members of our community how to avoid violence. Don't walk here, do walk there, putting up posters, we've been attacked there. If you're a woman, don't get and you're coming out of a lesbian bar, don't get in a cab. We have all these rules about what you're supposed to do, which is essentially saying, we always try not to say this, it's essentially saying, really, you ought to stay indoors, or at least not be out at night. So on the one hand, there's a community awareness and it's doing things like this today, and it's maintaining these statistics and issuing press releases and all that kind of stuff. I think it's being aggressive with the police and the prosecutors. I think most importantly, it's getting the issue of gay and lesbian bias in the curriculum of the schools, which there is a move afoot to do that now as part of the multicultural diversity plan in the city. And there is the bias bill, which is 2 versions are now pending. You'll hear more about that today. What's interesting about the bias bill, though, is that it would extend protection to, especially the latter version, would extend protection to 3 classes that are not now protected that one would think would get behind this bill significantly, and that is, it would extend protection to sex, age, and disability, as well as sexual orientation. And those things are not now covered under the aggravated harassment statute. We all know crimes against women, particularly, or crimes motivated by sex, are rampant. We know that disabled people are victimized horribly, and unfortunately there's no statistics on that. I would say more so than gay men and lesbians. And we know that older people, particularly the infirm in New York, are victimized terribly. Who's been pushing this bill for 3 years? And what's been holding up the passage of the bill for 3 years? Sex, sexual orientation, the dirty deed that gay men and lesbians There seems to be movement afoot this year to broaden the coalition, and there is a movement afoot to broaden the coalition to support this bill. But I don't think we should kid ourselves, and we heard from both prior speakers about the effect of law, that the number of people that we are going to get an extended term on, or they're going to be in prison longer on account of convictions under either bill, is a pitiful handful. And the number of days that people will serve longer is going to be a pitiful number as well. And so what it is, in my opinion, although I feel very strongly about this, is it is a symbolic bill. Very important to send that symbol that sexual orientation, crimes against people on account of sexual orientation, are as offensive as crimes committed on account of other factors, traditional factors. Although I think that's critical and important symbolic message, we should not lose the fact that it is largely symbolic, and that, well, we as gay men and lesbians have devoted our energy to that bill. The move for a civil rights bill to extend civil rights to gay men and lesbians has died for 2 years. So, that's it. I appreciate you calling. I'll be happy to talk.
But if you have questions for Matt, I hope you're going to be around for a little while longer. I think you have a few minutes. Maybe you could ask him. We have a very important speaker coming up. Thank you very much, Matt. I want to introduce the next speaker first with a quote from Robert Kennedy, which relates very much to the atmosphere right now in New York. And by the way, the next speaker represents a lot to me personally, and I'll explain that to you. The quote from Robert Kennedy is, "No one, no matter where he lives or what he does, can be certain whom next will suffer from some senseless act of bloodshed, and yet it goes on and on and on in this country of ours." Robert Kennedy said those words the day after Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. And of course, unfortunately for all of us, Robert Kennedy did not live to help us, because a month later he was assassinated as well. But that doesn't mean our work can't go on. And our next speaker, for me, epitomizes the legacy of Martin Luther King and Robert F. Kennedy, and for me also is an inspiration as an Italian American, as he is worked diligently for civil rights and for labor rights, as well as for the rights of tenants. If you are aware of the tenant law that allows a tenant not to pay rent as long as the landlord does not fix basic features of the apartment that are needed for living, in which you're allowed to withhold rent, that is the work of Assemblyman Frank Barbaro. He is an assemblyman from the district in Brooklyn that includes Gravesend and Bensonhurst. And during the Bensonhurst upheaval, after Yusuf Hawkins was killed, Frank Barbaro, I can proudly say, was an Italian American who walked through that community and basically told people that what they're doing is making themselves look like fools, and to basically show respect for people who are coming through that community. And he is an example of our progressive tradition in Italian American culture, going back to the founder of Italy, Giuseppe Garibaldi, and also the great theorists of modern democracy and the tradition that I just mentioned, which is the American tradition of Martin Luther King, Robert F. Kennedy, and John F. Kennedy. And he is a Democrat from Brooklyn. He's a state assemblyman, and my dad was a longshoreman. He still is a longshoreman, and Frank Barbaro was a longshoreman before he went to Brooklyn Law School, got his degree, and was elected. He ran for mayor in 1981 against Mayor Koch, which helped set the foundation for the mayoralty that we now have in New York City. And I'm proud to say that I volunteered for him in 1981, and I'm proud to say that he's here for the quality people who have arrived here today to hear this great man.
Thank you all. What an introduction. Let me sort of be a politician for a minute and express the frustration of what I like to consider a progressive politician. I don't like the word liberal because, well, that's another question. If anybody wants to ask me why later, I'll indulge you. But the frustration that I face as a progressive politician working in the New York State Assembly, which I generally now characterize as having the ideology of a bit to the right of Attila the Hun. And I have to say this, I agree with what Matt Foreman said almost totally, because I think it's important for us to hear the incredible frustration, the particular frustration caused by the oppression that this community of our brothers and sisters are subjected to. As was pointed out, I ran for mayor in 1981, and during the course of that campaign, I worked very closely with elements of the gay and lesbian community, and having thought that I really was educated and knew what it was all about, that experience really taught me that I knew little or nothing of the human dimension of what bias is, in the particular case, gay and lesbian people. So I think it's important for us to hear I don't want to call it anger. I don't think that was a correct characterization that Brother Foreman made. I think we should characterize it as the plea for humanity to recognize a form of particular and insidious oppression of a group of people. So I feel that that was important. The only thing I would point out, if I could, to the brother, is I think we need to talk more about coalitions. How do we begin to develop more of a coalition between the gay and lesbian community and other groups, tenant groups, the trade union movement? This is a very important development, I think, that we have to begin to move forward. And I really don't want to hear, remarks that smell of the movie Joe, if any of you are old enough to have seen it, or if you're up late at night, maybe you saw it, but that was a movie which characterizes a blue-collar, bigot, arch-conservative type guy. But I think that we need to be positive and say, if we're going to move the protection for gay and lesbian people forth in the state houses and in the Congress, it's not going to happen, in my judgment, significantly, qualitatively, unless we begin to develop the kinds of coalitions that begin to articulate the point that oppression against one is oppression against all others, and we need to work together to wipe out that oppression. That, I think, needs to be articulated in the future more definitively and more aggressively. And the other thing is the frustration as a progressive politician is that Matt Foreman did not point out a very significant fact, and that is the Afro-American and the Latino community in Albany, the legislators, I think took a very principled, noble stand on the bill, the bias bill. The Senate, after a number of years, was willing to pass the bill, as long as we left sexual orientation out. Now, you should know that the halls of the legislative halls reek with the word compromise, sometimes, or most times, as far as I'm concerned, negatively. In other words, we take a good concept, we develop a good bill, and then we compromise and we end up with a shell, which is really nothing but good PR for politicians. But the Afro-American and the Latino community could very easily have sold out the gay and lesbian community on that issue, because the Senate was prepared to pass that bill. And I think that has to be articulated so that we begin to lay the basis for more thinking of coalition. The Afro-American and the Latino legislators understood the question of coalition and refused to budge on that issue. I think it's also important that when we begin to throw these shots, I used to have a longshoreman friend of mine who would say, if you're going to throw a shot, please aim your shot. And I think we need to aim the shot. That bill passed the Assembly. And some people say it's stalled in the Senate. It's not stalled, it's being stonewalled. And I think it's important to point out that the New York City legislators, the overwhelming majority of them, voted for that bill. I repeat, the New York City legislators voted for that bill, and it is being stonewalled in the Senate. Why am I so sensitive to that? I'm sensitive to that because we're trying to get a bill passed that will give some modicum of justice to working people when they're hurt, a workers' compensation bill. And we have people going around saying, oh, the bill is stalled in the Senate, as if it's some kind of an intellectual discussion over how best to take care of working people. Exactly the opposite. How to hurt working people is what the Senate is trying to do, and they are stonewalling, saying we absolutely refuse to pass this bill. Well, I'm very happy to tell you that in my 18 years in Albany, we have really turned up the heat, and for the first time in my experience, I think working people are really going to achieve a tremendous victory on this issue. So I would just point that out. I think it's important when we're articulating an issue and trying to get support and develop a political movement that we be careful and identify who the true culprits are. Because then we can aim our fire. We can go to a Roy Goodman and say, Roy, we know you're for this bill. AIDS epidemic or the AIDS illness is the result of God's wrath on the gay and lesbian community. He really said that. So this is the mentality that you're dealing with. But I think that people need to visit a Roy Goodman and a Frank Padovan. I don't know where he is on the bill. But those Republicans that are in the city are very important, because the Republicans only have a majority of 4 seats in the Senate. And if they lose 4 seats, the Democrats, Manny Orenstein, who is a friend and is supporting the bill, would become the majority. So we need to become a bit more sophisticated, it seems to me, as who the enemies are in the struggle for human dignity and human rights. I make that point because as I said, I'm very sensitive to it, and I think it's important. I'd like to start the discussion here on the question of bias, just with a few minutes to sort of give a historical perspective, because I truly believe that unless we do that, I think we start off the discourse with incomplete foundation. And what is the root cause of bias? You know, there are primary issues, as you know, when you take your exams, and there are secondary issues in a legal problem. And I believe that the primary cause of bigotry against Afro-Americans and Latinos and gays and lesbians is a class question. I mean, if you study the history of oppression against Afro-American people, there was developed a legal, a moral rationale for having a slave society. I mean, the white ministers had to get up in front of the flock, and how would they justify oppressing an entire nation, if you please, continent of people? And they developed a distorted concept that even God willed that white people should dominate black people. Because how could you justify a slave system? You had to do it that way. And then when we got rid of slavery, how do you justify the class oppression of people? And how do you not use Afro-American people working at lower wages to keep the wages of white workers down? And if you read, you might want to do that to get a real trade union understanding of what America is really all about and what the law is all about. Because when I went to law school, I thought I would go to college and into law school and be able to fight for poor people. Boy, was I disabused of that quickly. As you know, 90% of what you learn deals with property, and you are inculcated with the sanctity of property, that nobody can touch it, and there are certain rules that you have to follow, which are diametrically opposed to the whole concept of trade unionism. So if you want a nice history of what really happened in America with trade unions, and really what was at the root cause and the bottom of the laws of trusts and monopolies and property and all of that. Read a little book called Labor's Untold Story, and that, I think, will give you a very good background, it seems to me. But in it you will see that there was a